Welcome back, everyone, to Merge Conflict, your weekly developer podcast about all things in the world of technology and development and all that goodness. And with me is someone completely different than normal. You're probably just wondering, where is Frank Krueger? Especially if you're watching us on YouTube, you're like, what is going on? But you're going to hear the silky smooth voice tonight of one of my best friends in the entire world, Ben Ruiz, who him and I go back, oh my gosh, like 2007, 2007, like what is that, like 1,000 years ago? Like
yeah, might as
ben
well
and i
be.
ben and I worked together at a game studio when I was in college, and then right out of college we worked on Xbox 360 games. You've heard it about on the podcast, the epic Shred Nebula. Ben and I have remained diehard friends throughout all the years, from me moving to the Pacific Northwest. Ben recently visited me out here, showing me some new stuff that he was working on. He's a designer. He's a game designer. He's, um, I would say, a wordsmith, a poet, a novelist. He is um, a game board designer now, a balancer, a tester, a distributor, all the things. I don't know. What aren't you, Ben, at this point? Maybe I just let you say who you are, but Ben is one of the best. He's our officiant at our wedding. He is that amazing of a person that I love him with every ounce of my body. And I don't know why it's taken 420,000 episodes to get him on this podcast, but tonight is something really special because Ben not only has been in the game industry for a long time, but just released his first board game that he designed, developed, test, distributed, Age of Angra, that I recently purchased and played. And tonight is going to be something super special because we're going to talk about that process and how also AI has influenced this new process of not only creating games, but also board games in the whole industry. So this is something unique. So that's what I want to Ben on. That's my introduction, Ben. So you want to tell people what I missed about anything there? What do you think? How did I do?
I love it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. You didn't miss anything. You nailed it. I would say primarily I am a game designer. That is at the core of my identity for sure. I love it to death, always have. I've been in video games since about 2005, 2006-ish. I met James on a team where there was a small group of us trying to get something out on the live arcade. And I think that came out 2007-ish, something like that, 2008. So been making games since then, been making video games since then. But in the last couple years, here's what happened. I visit my best friend and his family on Sundays, and his son, who was 11, 12 at the time, was really into Pokemon. Pokemon was happening on YouTube, right? And my friend asked me, is this game actually fun? And I said, actually, it is, and we should play it. We ended up playing Pokemon for like 3 or 4 months. And then I started thinking it would have been cool if Pokemon grew up with us. And this idea started cooking. And I used that very, very generous, kind friend to test the game that just came out a couple weeks ago. So I wasn't planning on doing board and card game design at any point, even though I enjoy them very much. But this sort of a spontaneous opportunity to do so emerged, and I jumped on it. And it ended up being so much fun that it's now absolutely a part of my future from here on out, because it is everything that is fun about game design at a much higher speed. And I'm loving that. But yeah, I would say game designer for sure. I've been an artist, been an art director, been an animator, been a VFX guy. I love combat systems, but no, you nailed it, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, Ben, we're pretty synonymous, and some of the history here together is that at the game studio, we were really big into fighting games, specifically Street Fighter.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite Street Fighter?
Third Strike, the one that we played the most at that
Yeah.
company, is hands down my favorite one of all time. I mean, there was like a very tangled web of Third Strike at that company that was very enjoyable. You and I played, me and Jorge played, Chris and I played, and it's like a fun, different relationship on sort of each
Yeah.
theater of war there. And that's what I love about the game. But Third Strike for sure. I'll play any fighting game someone says, hey, try this with me.
Yeah.
I'll bring it on. But I mean, I'm 40, so I got to live through that golden age of arcade fighting games. And so they're a big deal to me for sure.
Absolutely. So And I'm really bad at fighting games. So when he says play, he means just destroy me. So okay, so you are not only an artist, a game designer, all these amazing things, and you've been working specifically on video games, whether it be console, whether it be desktop. When it comes to board games specifically, were you a player? Were you an observer? What was your like relationship with board games specifically? And when I mean that, there's a vast array of board games. Like in that, what was your relationship to maybe a specific area of board games? Just like we've talked about fighting games, like what is that with board games?
Yeah, for sure. As a game designer, I'd say I've probably been an observer more often than I've been a player, at least until the last few years. It's just one of those things where, if any friend says, I've got a board game. I've got some new card game. Will you try it? Do you want to come hang out while we play it? I'll probably always do that at the very least, just to see what's going on. But I have played my games for sure. Like card games are what I primarily grew up with: Magic, Rage, the Pokemon stuff. Like that's kind of where my heart is. But I'll play anything on a tabletop people want to. But I'd say it's a pretty good blend of watching and playing, and I always end up thinking about it, and that's the fun part. So,
No.
yeah,
When you got started in your journey towards developing and designing board games, like what was you talked about the catalyst with that experience with
yeah,
Pokemon, but where do you even start? Because like, as developers, we start with a file new project. I want to create a mobile app. I want to create a desktop app. I want to create a website. I go in to Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio, and I'm like, let me just create a new thing. Like, where does it begin?
yeah. Good question, and I'm very used to answering this question, fortunately, because it's an important question that I get a lot.
Mm,
I'm happy to say it's very, very simple, and it doesn't have to be complicated. If I get an idea for anything, I'm not thinking about if it's good or if it's bad or if it's going to be competitive I don't think about any of that. I just think I have an idea in my mind. It's itchy. It has heat. I'm feeling it. All I do is open up Notepad on my phone and start writing. I
mm,
don't like, I'm not even writing something specific. I'll write, I have a game idea and it's about um, cult brawlers fighting on the streets. So it's just like a sentence anyone can understand,
yeah.
but that's the core of the exciting part. And then from there, it's just, okay, what kind of thing would this be like? Maybe it's like Final Fantasy Tactics. Maybe it's kind of like Magic the Gathering. What do I like about those things? So I think it's just about like looking into the part of your brain that's excited, get it onto Notepad, and see what like is hot enough to stay in the Notepad document. It deletes some stuff that doesn't make sense. It doesn't feel good. Once I have like a couple pages of something that feels solid, I will just grab letter paper and some markers and cut some stuff up and play it with someone who's willing to. It's
Mm,
gonna suck. Like no one has ever done this on the first iteration, and it's been so fun and so engaging. But you got to have an honest friend that says, that was kind of cool. Here's why. That kind of sucked. Here's why. And then you just go from there. And for me, it's as simple as that. I think having the confidence to just put a crappy thing on the table after putting a crappy thing in a notepad document and then just letting it grow is the key to all of it.
no, that's it's so I can envision it, right? I think I can envision like what you're talking about because I think that's sort of in a way what I've done with software. And it's so funny to think about. It's like you have an idea, like, it'd be really great is like I'm doing something, I'm cycling. It'd be really great if I had an app that did this thing, like
Yep.
connected to this thing and give me a thing. I'm like, what would that look like? And I go down, I draw a box and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I put like little things down. There's like little software to do that. And then I'm like, oh, let me just like slap. It's gonna like not work. It's gonna like,
Yeah.
the UI is gonna be terrible. Who cares? Like it's for me to try. It's
Yep.
crazy applying the same concepts to board games because I couldn't even imagine that. Like, are you at that instance in that process when you're in the notepad or you're starting to cut out? Are you like grabbing elements from other games? Or you're like, I'm going to take a little bit of Magic. I'm going to take a little bit of Pokemon. I'm going to take a little bit of Catan, right? And like slap
Yeah.
it together. Like, is that a process that you go through?
Yeah, for sure. I think it kind of seems like the thing all creative people have in common is that there's this big soup of fun stuff that they sort of maintain.
Mm,
And I feel very, very comfortable sifting through the soup and looking for anything that feels relevant or feels exciting or feels hot. and just slapping it in and letting it sit for a second and going, maybe this should be something. So yes, absolutely. I think that soup is really important. And I will absolutely explicitly say, I'm going to just do that thing that Magic did and we'll see how it feels, because nothing matters unless it's fun or not. So if I
Yeah.
take this thing from Magic and it's super fun and successful, well, the only problem now is you can't call it what Wizards of the Coast called it. It can't be called Scry. They'll sue you and ruin your life, right? So
Yeah.
now that we know it's fun, it's worth now brainstorming a new name. So I kind of just like to take these things step by step, and absolutely have no hesitation, just taking from the soup at all times. That's what it's there for.
No.
That's the gift of the soup.
The gift of the soup. I like that. That's going to be the podcast episode name. The gift of the soup. Well, you keep saying a word fun. How do you describe fun? What's fun? What's that? What is it?
Yeah. So I think so. There's two really important things. Fun is one of them. Engagement is the other.
Hmm.
I try to be fun forward, right? Engagement's also important. But to me, I'm measuring fun, especially with the card and the board games, by watching and paying attention to the person that I'm playing with. It isn't that hard to tell when someone's not having fun or not engaged, and they're just behaving a certain way because they care about you.
Hmm.
This is why strangers are so valuable. Strangers are like, I don't care about this, and I don't care about your feelings. Great. But to me, I'm paying attention to their facial expressions, their voice. The best thing I could possibly hear is, whoa, let's play again. Like, now I'm thinking about let's play again. And when people start to get over that hump of like, I'm done chewing on the rules now, and now I can taste the flavors you've provided here. Now when they start to go, ooh, okay, what about this? Ooh, okay. And that's when it's like, it's just childlike signs of very obvious fun. There isn't anything tricky about it. It's just, what do kids look like on a playground? And that's what I'm chasing. I make the distinction with engagement, though, is because there are things that can be engaging and not fun. And I
Hmm.
think those are valid experiences too, but that's not usually what I'm trying to make.
Gotcha. Is there
Yeah.
when I think for me, there's that emotional part of fun. You kind of gave the example of the play it again, like, oh, it's that. Is there any is there any special, like, when you're do you do you also have to be having fun as the designer? Because I think one time when I think of software, I'm just like, oh my God, I gotta fix this bug. Like, let me just be done with this. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
is that an aspect of it, of like, okay, like, I'm actually having fun playing this game? Is how important is that to you, and that emotion that you're feeling? What's that tingle that you're getting? Because it
Yeah.
sounds like you're getting emotional, like, feedback, like, from others. But what about
Mm,
you? You know what I mean? Like, as you're
yeah.
playing and you're going through this prototyping phase.
Yeah, I absolutely have to be having fun. And that's not even ideological. If the thing isn't fun, I just don't want to work on it.
Yeah.
So when like from the beginning, it's already starting with things I'm putting in the notepad in the first place because I'm already excited about it. So everything that I do has a through line of, this is a thing I would like. And then generally my struggle is making sure it's also a thing non-Ben Reese's would like, because that's the
Yeah.
rest of the world, right? So
Yeah.
100% it's about like, I need to be having fun, but then make sure that it's not so deeply personal that it can be successful. But yeah, I'm
Mhm.
always having fun for sure, no matter what. As soon as it's boring, I either completely overhaul it or I scrap it and move on to the next thing.
Oh, wow. Got
Yeah.
it. How, in this process that you're just going in the beginning phase,
Mhm.
like, how does that compare to the work that you've done with video games, like, in that process? Because not only have you, like, we work together at a studio, but, like, you have
Yeah.
your own studio. You're creating games from scratch that you're designing, and you're
Mhm.
working with teams and you're managing. What is that design process like? And how does it compare, right? Is it the same amount of work? Is it a lot more, like, on the board, like, throwing away a lot more things and, like, starting new things? Or is it like, or is the amount of time and investment the same, or how does that compare? Because I'm really interested, because
Yeah.
for game stuff, like, I know people do tabletop, like, I want to create this platformer, right? And, like, will this be
Yeah.
fun? But there's something about touching and feeling. Like, you get to immediately touch and feel board game stuff. We get
Yes.
to, like, go in and start, like, writing code and get into Unity and get into Unreal, whatever you're using. Like, what
Yeah.
is that like, and how has that shifted for you doing some of this board game stuff?
Yeah, I mean it's really really night and day, even though the core skill set is very very similar. I mean, the thing with the video game or any piece of software is that you're constantly battling the technology. You're
Mm,
constantly battling the logistics of the product that you are trying to make, and so in an environment in which a video game is being made, like the distance you have to run to make the thing work in the first place is huge. The distance you have to run beyond that to make sure that it's something people enjoy, to make sure it's on mark against what your publisher is asking for, the problem you're trying to solve with your team members. It's just a lot more running, and it takes a lot more time to get to the point where you know it has succeeded or not. And that's life, but part of the reason I'm enjoying the card and board game design so much is because that process is so fast. There isn't any technology to battle. There isn't an engine to debug. The engine is just cards on a table,
yeah.
or easy to manage components on a table. So when I show up at my friend's house or a tester's house, or they're here and it's like time to play this thing, we're going in a minute. We're going in 90 seconds. It's so much more lubricated. And I mean, I love both lives, but I think the having access to both of them is really, really nice for the other. But yeah, night and day for sure. I really like that. This card game that I just released, by the way, took about 2 years of testing and working on and iterating and perfecting, and then it took 3 to 6 months to get it like manufacture ready. A game I work on in the future will never take that long ever again.
Mm.
Everything I learned is applicable to any other thing I could possibly work on, and so it's never going to be that distance ever again, and it was already a much shorter distance. So yeah, night and day. I love it. It's so much better. Core skill set's the same, but wow, it's a lot more of a fun ride.
What? Okay, so I don't want to throw the game industry. I mean, I was in the game industry, right? And like, and they're both game industries, right? Because
Yeah,
the thing that fascinates me is like with the board game versus the video games. It almost feels like board games sort of were they're almost kind of the classic video game, which is like, when you're releasing an SNES or an NES game or anything up until like last generation, right? It was like the game had to be perfect, right?
yeah,
Like you weren't patching your game on your
yeah,
NES, right? You know what I mean? Like it
yes,
is out, it's happening. You don't have alpha or beta testers that you're getting early access to.
yep,
Like you have to get this game perfect.
hmm,
Like typos, like the
yeah,
balancing, the things like this. What is that process like of this 2 years? Like, was it 23 months of testing it and perfecting it? Like, where does it go from I have it on the napkin, I'm writing it down, I'm in Notepad, I've prototyped it out. Can you walk through the stages of this board
yeah.
game evolution of that 2 years? Because I think that would be really interesting to kind of learn what was in that.
Yes, absolutely. It's I'm getting the idea while I'm over at my friend's house. I'm spending a little bit of time in Notepad, not that much. The thing that happened pretty quickly was taking version one over to their house to play. And I had already talked to the friend a little bit about it, but getting version one prepared was like I had kind of mentioned a little bit earlier. That was quick and dirty. That was just printing out a couple pieces of art that I'd done, chopping up some paper, and bringing it over there and just kind of sitting in it together and attempting to play it and immediately going, oh, this is a mess. How do I clean it up? What
Yeah.
do you think would be cool here? So version one was just like a scrappy, stereotypical game prototype that didn't make a ton of sense. But both friend and I were excited about it, so that was a big deal. So what the next year and a half looked like was every week I would just bring over a new version of the game, even if it was just a few changes at a time. The second week I was doing this, everything's much cleaner, right? Like it was no longer a dumpster fire. It
Mm,
still was a game that wasn't like functional or particularly fun yet, but it wasn't a dumpster fire anymore. I immediately was like, this is too messy. This is too ugly. This is too confusing. And I cleaned all that up. So week two is just a less dumpster fire version of this. Week three is now we kind of identified a fun thing last week. Now I've put emphasis on that fun thing. And it's just that. It's just an iteration process where every week I'm attempting to make the components a little bit more attractive, and I'm attempting to clean everything up and just slowly turn the dial up on the fun and engaging parts. And I would say after about 3 months, maybe, suddenly we're having a really good time. Like enough things kind of fell into place that we're having a great time, and we're talking about the game itself after the
Yeah.
game and not the prototype, right?
Yeah.
And that's just kind of how it went. It was just this, it was this slow growth over time, and once I had sort of made the deal with the publisher, Monument Hobbies, once I had made the deal with them and everything was a go, that last stretch was at that point not a lot. I was trying to wrap up design and freeze everything so that things didn't, and that was a lot more just hard um, production and manufacturing work, the typos part, the rule book part, the box art part, just making sure all that stuff was attractive and pretty and looking good. And that was a pretty difficult process because it was all of our first time doing that.
Uh,
And it was really taxing on the graphic design part of my brain because I'm not great at graphic design, but learning experience. But yeah, that last phase was no more design. Let's now make this thing look really, really attractive once it's on the shelf and once it's open on a table.
how did you keep going though? Because, you're talking about getting this like idea in your head, getting it down, the weeks and the iteration. How do you keep yourself going? You know what I mean? Like, how do you
Yeah.
not hate, like, how the end of the 2 year, how do you not hate it? You know what I mean? Like, because you
Yeah.
start and like the first, like, because I compare it so close to the game that we worked on, the software. Like, by
Right.
the end of it, you either like, this is the best thing ever. Like, I'm so happy, or just like,
Sure.
wow, that was a grind. And you're like,
Yeah.
I want this just to be done. Like,
Yeah.
what first, even before you describe that, what was your feeling when you shipped it? Was it, oh my God, thank God? Or was it like this like moment? Like, what was
Well,
that feeling, I guess, before my
yeah.
first question? Like what was that feeling for you?
Yes, that's a fair question for sure. Um, I hate to disappoint, but it was pretty mild. It was like I definitely I was experiencing the pleasure of having shipped a thing
Yeah.
for sure.
No.
But I had enough of an idea about what the game was that I was just kind of able to comfortably go, okay, it's out. Whatever's going to happen, it's going to happen. It's all good. Um, if it succeeds, I get to continue to develop. I had designed this thing to be expandable if it was successful. So I was already mentally ready to work on it some more if need be. I would love it if one of my games was successful in making me money and now I get to keep working on it.
Yeah.
But if it didn't, the worst case scenario is just, okay, it didn't work, on to the next thing. So I'm kind of already like in a comfortable place where there's no hinges. I'm not like, there's no real stakes. So it was pretty mild. I was very glad it was released, but I'm just kind of seeing what happens, and that's okay. I don't even know how much it's sold yet. I've told the publisher explicitly, do not involve me in the numbers, do not
Mm.
involve me in the financials of it. When I get my first check, I'll know then if it's successful or not, right? Who cares? So yeah, ship was pretty chill.
Nice. I like there's a podcast that Frank and I listen to from some iOS developers, and early on the app release process was just like a nightmare. And
Yeah.
it's so slow, and you go in and you're doing this, you're waiting for the review and for the things to go live. And it's very like anticlimactic. You're like, I guess it's live. I guess it's there. I guess I go to sleep now. Like, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like it's out. Some people think it's like this huge celebration party. And it's like, oh, it's like, okay, someone can click buy on the thing. And
Yeah.
I guess they get it in a week shipped.
Yeah.
So how did you keep going? How did you get not only you going, but your friend or
Yeah.
friends to
Yeah.
not also like make them hate you for making you play your game like for a year and a half straight. You know what I mean? Through
Yeah.
that process, because it's something different to be like, oh, like getting paid to do that. Like, we had game testers and like to
Right.
actually get paid to do that,
Right.
but they're like free testing basically. I
Yeah.
mean, maybe you bought dinner for them every night, but that'd be expensive, right? So it's like, how did you get that going? How did you get yourself through that slog of trying to get it to a state where you're like, this is it?
Yes. So, two very important things. One is that regardless of what's happening with the testers, and I made that distinction earlier between engagement and fun. When it comes to game design for me, 100% of the time I'm engaged. So even if I'm working on a disaster or something that's very difficult and I'm not having fun, I'm still engaged. And
Yeah.
that's really important. That's why I chose this as my path. So even when it's really bad, I'm engaged, and that's huge. That's an enormous creative privilege. But the thing is 80% of the time I am having fun.
Yeah.
So when I take the game over to a tester and we have our experience and we talk about it after, that night, 99% of the time, I'm going to sit down before I go to bed outside, light a cigar, get a drink, and immediately start that design work of what notes did I take? What needs to change? How do I iterate this? And then I probably do that work tomorrow because I'm already having a super good time. So,
Yeah.
so I'm already in love with this process, and that's how I survive it. I'm not really even enduring anything. I'm really just kind of trying to, if anything, I'm trying to keep myself under control. I have 4 more games in the queue with this publisher because I compulsively am doing this all the time, and too much of my free time unhealthily is devoted to this process. So that's the question you should be asking: is your mental health problem is on this side of the spectrum. It's not on enduring, it's on chilling out and having, some R&R and calming your brain down. But I love it too much. So that's the answer. I genuinely am enjoying it 80% of the time and am super engaged 100% of the time.
Very nice. I like
Yeah.
that. Um, so in this process, you're an artist. There's a lot of elements to this game. Maybe I think, but before we talk about the art and how you got there and the
Yeah.
technology you used, maybe paint a picture of the game a little bit. I think you'll do a better job. Like, I think that I've watched many interviews with you. I've watched full gameplays, and I'll link to everything in the show notes and also
Sure.
to the different YouTube things.
I
Can you
appreciate it. Yeah.
describe the Age of Angra, like where you describe where it came from, but like what it is, what type of game it is, and also the elements to it, because there's a lot of elements to this game.
Yeah. So Age of Angra is a simply put, it's a 2v2 monster battler. So Pokemon is a monster battler. It spawned a whole generation of imitators. So at its core, it's a monster battler, and I've always described it as a slow motion fighting game. So it's for you and one other person. You build a team of 2 monsters. Or you select one of the magical humans at the helm of the team. You select a couple other fun things, and you're really just kind of putting together a team, and then you duke it out. But it's the kind of experience it's got a large mental load. It's very technical. I encourage everyone in the rulebook itself, take your time, think about these things, talk with your opponent about it. I really am attempting to create like the most mythical combat experience that could possibly happen, which will require both people to like slow their heart rate and talk to each other. So that's the kind of game it is. It's like we've all experienced the pleasure of fighting games, but we've also experienced the increased heart rate and the clammy hands and the moist armpits and the I can't take too much more of this because I'm like my nervous system is up here. And so this is me kind of trying to go, what if it was that fun, but you got to like stay down here and really just think the chess of fighting games. So yeah, it's a monster battler. It's got a heavy Middle Eastern theme. It's got a real fun story, a big narrative payload inside the book, and on the back, all the cards. It's something I'm prepared to turn into a cool video game if it becomes some big successful thing. So a part of it along this whole like design journey of it was thinking, would this be cool as a video game if it
Oh,
was?
yeah.
If it wouldn't be cool as a video game, I would do something else, right?
Wow.
So that was a huge part of the process too. But yeah, it's a mythical monster battler at its core.
And for people I can kind of describe this a little bit, because if you actually have played Pokemon, actually, the more I've played Ben's game and the more I talk to Ben and listen to him talk, these elements of what he's describing are really connecting with me in a very positive way. Because I was a Pokemon kid
Yeah,
myself, blue cartridge as my go-to.
hell yeah.
And when you sit down at the table, you have the board in front of you, and each of your monsters, Azuras, is that correct?
Asura.
Asuras.
Yeah,
Um, I have braces, so I kind of slur a few
you're
letters in
good.
there. So um, they're on there, and you have a forward and a back, but each of them have different skills. So when I think about
Mhm.
it, Pokemon always was a 1v1 kind of battler system. And then
Yeah.
later on, they introduced 2v2, and then more like a 3 and a 4, whatever.
Right.
But each of your Pokemon has like 4 skills, 4 abilities, basically. If you match that with what you said as a battler, there are like heavy and light attacks, right? Just like if you're playing Street Fighter, you have a heavy attack, a light attack, and they have different things
Yeah.
with them. And there's all different sorts of things going on. There's different currencies about them. At their core, you're trading back and forth these blows or defenses that are going on this board. So there's a lot of elements going on, and there's a lot of art going on too.
Yeah.
You're an amazing artist.
Thank you.
One of the best artists that I personally know and have worked with over the years. And
I appreciate it.
the things that you make are stunning on there. And I got to sit down and I went to the local game store and I played with someone brand new and never played with. I never played the game. They never played the game. They never heard of it. I'm like, this just came out. My best friend in the world just made it. And it's beautiful. And we sat down and people were commenting on the elements of the game, but on the art as well.
Yeah.
And I said, I've worked with Ben a lot, and he was talking a little bit about how AI has impacted his art. And, as I'm talking about this, right, there's the game board itself. There are the monsters themselves. There's the player, the shepherd, who is the human form that is sort of making the moves for this. There's all of the elements on the board. Like, what process does art actually come into play? Like, are you doing art like that week 1, week 2? Like, are there tools that you're using to like prototype that stuff out? Like, is it important? Like, how important is the art? You know what I mean? At what stage does it become important?
Yeah. I would say it becomes important as soon as you can possibly afford it. I think that, and a lot of this comes from the video game designer background, but so much of, and this is agnostic, video game, board game, card game, so much of the pleasure is coming from the sensory experience, the things that you're looking at, the things that you're listening to, the way it feels in your hands. If it's a video game, the way that the dice and the cards feel, if it's a physical game, these things are very, very important. And that's not really arguable. Some people could argue it because there are ugly and successful games. But I would counter argue that those games would be even more successful if they were also attractive, right?
Yeah.
And that's when they shut up. So I think it's very important. I think it should happen as soon as one can possibly afford that. For Age of Angra, I was doing illustrations for it from the start. Because I was already getting so much energy and motivation from the idea that I was just organically opening up my iPad and painting these things. It wasn't necessarily with intention. It was just, I've got this thing in my head. I got to squeeze it out and get some illustrations done. By the time I bit the bullet on making version 1, I already had a handful of these illustrations just sitting there. So yeah, of course they went on the cards, and that was a key piece of art. And I would think honestly that if I didn't have the art of the creatures on that very first dumpster fire, I don't think the dumpster fire survives, because my friend is able to at least go, I really like this monster though. This one's really cool. This game is nonsense, but like, oh, these creatures are dope. If those weren't there, that thing maybe dies on the spot. So I think it's extremely important. And I was updating the art and iterating on the visuals of the experience at every single turn. It felt almost as important as the design. Obviously, it has to be more fun. That's the most important thing. But yeah, I think art is absolutely crucial.
What type of like technology is, you said you're busting on an iPad, I think we use like Wacom boards back in the day, like you obviously started pen and paper doing this stuff. Like how has technology not only impacted this game, but actually like you as a graphic designer, as an artist over the last, since we started working, you know what I mean? Like how has that changed? Like how you're able to develop not only this board game, but also games in general?
Yeah, maybe a couple months before I started work on Age of Angra, I had bought an old iPad from a friend just because I wanted to try out illustration on iPad. I've used Wacom's for a million years. I don't love them. I never have. I don't like that disconnect.
Yeah.
So I was really curious about the iPad. I got it, and it's like, I mean, look, this thing is a old, slow iPad 4 inside like a crusty protective case. The pen is all busted up from me chewing on it. This thing's a piece of junk, but it works. Every single piece of art on all of the physical games I've made is done on this chunky iPad in Procreate. I don't think that the hardware is that important as long as it works, but it's 100% Procreate. The art that happens on the packaging side, the box, the rule book, I do all that in Photoshop. Some of you are screaming at me right now saying, why don't you use InDesign? Why don't you use Illustrator? And I would, but I'm too clumsy and slow on new software. I'm just that kind of old troll. So I do everything in Photoshop, but the illustrations is all in Procreate on a crappy iPad 4. I still have it. It's like sitting in my office right now until it falls apart and steam is coming out of it. When I turn it on, I'll just hold on to it. I'm
If
too
it works,
stubborn.
it works, right?
If
You
it
know what I
works,
mean?
yep.
Uh, well, Frank on the podcast, we talk a lot about AI and machine learning, and you can't get away from AI. It's everywhere and
Yeah.
all around us. And one of the things I use, and I've talked about on the podcast, is for like my YouTube. I use a lot of DALL-E in Bing Create
Yeah.
to actually generate background images and sometimes foreground images. And for a long time for the podcast, I was generating images for thumbnails, right? How is AI and the different tooling as have you integrated into your process? Are you resisting the process? Are you balancing the process? And it's moving fast, and there's a lot of different elements. Like, how are you as a artist and a designer and a game designer for both game and board game? How is that impacting you?
Yeah. So I'm 100% pro AI tools to an extent. I think that I've learned a lot of important things working with the publisher of my video games, Annapurna, and they have an interactive side, which is video games, and they have a film side, which is Annapurna Pictures, and they're the same legal body, right? So what I've learned in working on the video game is that um, the way AI affects certain types of talent is a real thing.
Mm,
So I try and stay as cognizant of that as possible. But when it comes to the board and card games, where that's just me, none of the team of Dino God is there. That's just me in a cave, loving the quiet and the change of scenery. So even though it's under the Dino God name, that's all me. And specifically Mid-Journey, I find to be enormously useful in helping me sort of congeal the soup. Right. So there's a whole bunch of ideas in here and all these things that I love and I'm caring about and thinking about. And I find that being able to use a tool like that to rattle things loose and surprise myself with maybe things I wasn't thinking of, all extremely helpful. When it comes to Age of Angra specifically, um, a huge amount of it is human labor. So I did the illustrations of all the creatures. I did the art for the board. That's all by hand. The
wow,
graphic design was a human in Europe. This great guy that I'm going to keep working with, hopefully.
cool.
Um, the rule book I did all by hand. I didn't use any chat GTP. I just didn't need to, you know.
Yeah,
But I used Midjourney to do like the backgrounds of things. There needed to be a background there, so it's not just a piece of art on white or gray.
yeah,
And in those cases, I thought it's not going to take anything away from the experience if this thing you're not really paying attention to is AI generated.
yeah,
So I was sort of fusing this sort of like light background imagery created in AI tools with my own hand done artwork. The shepherds in particular, those are the magical humans you'll pick when you're making your team. That is a really interesting blend of imagery created in Midjourney with my own extensive by hand modification. And that was actually a lot of fun to do. I'm not going to say that's original Ben Reese art. I would never do that. I know how this goes, but it was still very fun generating these images and then taking bits and pieces from this and refining prompts and then doing a complex paint over so that they're all unified. I wanted them to look like they kind of came from the same place. So I actually found that so much fun. And I would absolutely continue to do that without, a problem from the publisher. And publishers are in the hot seat right now when it comes to AI tools. So ultimately, I'll let them make these calls. But I love them. I'm absolutely pro AI tools. I hope we can hit a point in the future in which they're not harming visual artists. We'll see how it goes. Whatever I can do there, I will do. But I'm always going to be pro AI tools. I think they're incredible.
oh, very cool. And it sounds like as you're drafting it, are you using it as a sort of companion? Like, I think when I, create images or I'm creating drafts, I'm having like a conversation with the thing that it's spitting out. Like, is that the same process? Like, I think it's different. Like me trying to pretend I know what I'm doing. Like, oh, that's a beautiful rainbow over like
Sure.
this little cute purple robot or whatever. You know what I mean? And like,
Yeah.
I don't care about too much about the end result because I'm kind of like blurring it and doing some stuff. But like, what's the interaction? Like, is it a lot of back and forth? Like, do you feel like an artist talking to like an artist friend that's like pumping out something and you're like, here, there you go. And you're like, you know what? And like, no, actually, like it'd be cool if this background was more purple. And like,
Sure.
what's that look like? Because to me, I think it's really different. Because here's how my analogy from it is we have something called like GitHub Copilot, and Copilot's very
Mhm.
synonymous in like Office Suite and in Bing and stuff like that.
Sure.
GitHub Copilot, it's inside of our code editor, and like it's ghost texting us. So like we start writing something, and it's like, I think you should write this, and
Ah, interesting.
it's like write sometimes it's a co-pilot, right?
Sure.
It's not like I am the code generator tool like to replace you. It's like, hey, I like analyze all this code. Like, I think this is what you're trying to do. Like, write me a method that like does this thing. And I start writing in. It's like,
Mm.
what about this? Right. Cause in code, we've always had like full line completion. Like it'll generate like what the next word is. Kind of like when you're writing an email, it's like, thanks you,
Sure.
thanks Ben. Hey Ben, but now it's like boom, right? And it's giving me recommendations and I could take it, but I got to like smooth it over.
Right.
And I'm not able to really have a conversation with it at that point. You know what I mean? It's like, here's what it's
Yeah.
given me. It doesn't smooth it over. What's that with art and like art that you're actually going to, just like we're going to use code in production, like you're using that art in production. What's that feel like, I guess?
Yeah. 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 So that's really interesting because it feels very different from what you just described. I'm not, um, I would not say I'm particularly skilled in Midjourney. I've
Mm,
used it a billion different times at this point, but I'm not particularly skilled. I acknowledge and recognize that there's a whole bunch of parameters and there's all kinds of cool knobs to tune, but I'm so bad with code and with language and syntax that I find that overwhelming. So
mm,
I'm always approaching Midjourney interaction just as just a way to generate just explode with visuals something. And I'm just using prompts, right? I know the basic stuff like aspect ratio and I
yeah.
gotta like, I've got some tips and tricks that are prompt based up my sleeve. But for the most part, I'm just kind of like, I feel like a technician. I feel like I'm just rattling loose a huge, infinitely sized bucket of random ideas. And for me, it's also very enjoyable. A lot of the times it feels like gambling to me, like Midjourney gives you 4 images every time you prompt it.
Mm.
And then you interact with those 4 images. And I find it very pleasurable just to see what in the hell is it going to show me today. It's like reaching into a dream dimension for random things. But I'm not very skilled. What ends up happening on anything that I like, the background of these Asura cards in this game, I did specifically pick those. I thought they looked good. Then I tuned the art to match the colors and the atmosphere and the lighting and stuff. But and that's what I mean is on the monster side. So I
Yeah.
would tune my illustration to match the Midjourney background image. But that was just me shotgunning for an image that might eventually feel perfect, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not even very skilled. I'm kind of playing a clown game of just popping open these parlor trick cans and seeing what visuals come out. So
That's
yeah,
great.
but it doesn't feel like a conversation. It feels like a slot machine for me.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's fascinating. Yeah. I feel like each tool is a little bit unique in that aspect of like
Yeah.
what you're going to get out with it. And I think we're in early stages and I'm personally excited about where things are going. Let me do
Yeah.
some rapid fire stuff as we kind of close
Yeah.
this out. What was your favorite part about working on the game?
Um, every week playing a slightly new version and very quickly seeing what was awesome and what was not. That was
Got so
hugely pleasurable every week.
that iteration. Got it. What's the thing that you hate the most about working on this game?
Um, whenever there was a huge change to all cards, I would have to print out 70 to 100 cards and then cut them.
Oh no.
So I'm trying really hard to make sure that this is physically fun. So I had all of my little cardstock things in sleeves, and reprinting was always a nightmare. Yeah.
It just reminds me of like I worked at the when I moved to Seattle, the first place I worked at, we did DVR hardware and software, and we always had to get like new
Yeah.
circuits made, and all the
Oh,
people that were designing the circuits like, oh, it's going to take forever, and it's like so
yeah.
slow. You get it back, and you're like, I need to change this one thing, and it's like a whole process all over again.
Yes. Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
okay. Who would like your game? Like, who is the audience for your game? Like this, someone is a gamer or a board game person. Like, who is someone that would be like, yeah, that's the type of game for me.
Yes. People who like crunchy competitive systems. If you're the kind of person who really, really wants to go head to head with a friend and have a complicated, beautiful dance, fighting game people, Magic the Gathering people, certain types of sports people, I think that's who the game's sort of singing to.
Nice. Why little to no chance in the game? And I want to make this clear. There are dice in this game,
Yeah.
but they are extremely rarely to never used. Why that decision? Because that's pretty atypical.
Yes. So I have such a bad emotional relationship with chance mechanics. I I have damaged friendships with my chance mechanics emotions. I there are games that I will not play anymore because my chance mechanics relationship got so bad. So it's me just really trying to sort of peel out that toxicity, but also create something where you feel like whatever happened, it's on you. And that's
Yeah.
really important to me. And you mentioned the dice. That's specific to one Asura. And I created that class of Asura, and there will be more because I know people still love rolling dice. So it's a choice, but it is by no means, part of the DNA of the game. Yeah. It's because I'm toxically abusive with chance mechanics.
I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
I feel like there are people that just really suck it in and love every aspect
Yes.
of it, and it's totally good
Yes.
to go.
I'm jealous.
What game are you playing right now?
Right now, I'm not playing a physical game at the moment, but I am playing Unicorn Overlord,
Mm,
which is a really old school type strategy game by Vanillaware, which is one of my favorite companies ever. The most beautiful 2D games in existence, and I'm having a great time. I love it.
very cool.
Yeah.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Trek.
Interesting. All right, so you're Frank's new friend and not mine apparently. Um, okay. Is there something that you've learned from this board game that you're taking in to your video games? Like, is there anything that you're like, oh wow, this actually applies, and you're integrating into? You're working on a game called Bounty Star. I
Yeah.
think we're not. I'm not. It's not a spoiler. There's trailers out there. I'll put a link in
Yeah.
the show notes
Thank you.
below. It's a beautiful looking game. I'm very excited for it. Is there something that you're like, oh wow, that was unexpected, that I'm actually going to bring into work that I'm going to do in video game world?
Yeah, I would say that I got a really nice insight into, I had a couple moments of insight in which I was able to look at a thing that just happened very quickly and efficiently in the board game design. And then in this very fortunate moment go, I think I can actually apply this to the video game to make the video game work faster and smoother and more lubricated. And there's been some application of that actually on the video game side, and it's a big deal. It is going to change the way we do the next product for sure, because I'm so spoiled now by the speed and lubrication of the board and card game design that, yeah, that's what's going to hit it the hardest, is wanting to capitalize on that as best as possible.
Very cool. All right, let's close it out. Where can people buy this game, Age of Angra?
Ageofangra.com. It'll redirect you to the publisher's website, and you can buy it and order it right now.
Oh, very cool. Now, with this game, it's all. Um, I just thought of something to linger this a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Is it's a physical board game, but I noticed that there's also a mobile app that goes with the
Yeah.
game. And as everyone knows, I'm a mobile app developer, and I was not called. I did not develop this app. What was the What is the motivation there to have this companion app, and then like as part of the game of, because I haven't seen this too often. Maybe it's like a standard
Yeah.
now, but like, what was the motivation there to introduce technology into the board game?
Yeah, no, it isn't standard, and I really wish it was, but I understand why it's not. It's difficult and complicated, especially if you don't have any experience there. It was really just because in order to get, because there's 4 creatures on the board with 1 to 36 hit points, and in order to fit the constraints of the box and like meet factory requirements, the component that tracked life couldn't be that complicated.
Ah,
So it just ended up as something that kind of had to be a little unwieldy and tough to deal with. And so the solution was, let's make an app so people can completely ignore this if we want.
got it.
I was able to get it off the ground very quickly, fortunately, because luckily I already kind of make software. So it's really just how do we give people the quickest path to getting a good time on, you know?
Very
I
cool,
wish
man.
everyone did it.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
I think that, and I think the interesting part there is, just like app developers and software developers have all these requirements at the app stores and all this stuff. And what you just said is really fascinating. The manufacturing requirements, the box requirements, the size of it,
Yeah.
like the things, like how things physically fit into a thing, I would
Yeah.
never have thought about, because I'd be like,
Yeah.
oh, just like here's all the things, and like the box is like this ginormous.
Yes.
You also have
Yes.
to ship the thing too to people, right? The weight is all
Yep.
important and things like that too.
Yep.
Really fascinating. Okay, where can people find you, studio, if they're interested in more, Ben?
Yeah. BenRuiz.net. Yeah, I have everything I've ever worked on is there. If there's a link, I've got it there. It links to like my old design writing. It links to my resume. It links to the board games. Yeah, BenRuiz.net.
Perfect. And I'll add all that to the show notes and links to the game,
Awesome.
everything like that. Ben, thanks so much for just like coming on, having a conversation. Hopefully it was something different people enjoyed, and definitely check
Yeah.
out the game if that's the type of game you're into. But hopefully people learned a little bit about it. I know I was just interested because I remember I was just on LinkedIn, and you just had put out something that was like, I released a game, and I was like, whoa, like, and I remember you mentioning something to me. I was like, insta buy, I got to get it. And then I had to
I
find someone to
appreciate it.
play it with, which was so cool. I super enjoyed it so much that I I talked to you for like an hour on the phone and just gave you feedback. Was that just, you can be honest? So I called up Ben, and this is like something you don't want to do with people, because like I regret it a little bit, not talking to you, but like,
Okay.
when like, as a software developer, like I make something and I'm like, oh, check out this app I made, and then immediately people dump stuff on you,
Sure.
and like you're like, wow, I just spent 2 years of my life, like, was that a good experience? Was it bad? Should I have just shut my mouth and been like, great game, Ben? Like, you know what I
No,
mean? Like, how are you
no,
handling that feedback?
that was an extremely positive experience for me. Um, if you're going to like completely pour yourself into something, the worst thing for me that can happen is not that someone has something bad to say, is if there's silence. Right.
Mm,
Like to me, it's like, what did I do? Anything that just got born into a grave and disappeared into the void. So even if someone were to call me on the phone and say, I just played Age of Angra and it sucks, and this is what I don't like, I'm all about that. Bring it
yeah.
on. It means I'm not invisible. The conversation with you specifically was extremely enjoyable because you're a friend. I trust you, but you went and played with a stranger. And that was huge because it was your feedback as a friend, and you were also relaying things to me that a stranger gave you. So that's the two most valuable types of feedback right there, all bundled together.
Mm.
Plus, it's fun talking to you. If you were the kind of person that was like irritating to be on the phone with, we're playing a different game here. But no, it was absolutely positive. And like I said, even if it's negative, for me, it's still a net positive. So absolutely, that was an extremely positive interaction.
Very cool. So give
Yeah.
feedback to the people you
Yes.
love in your life, to the software.
100%.
I always say it. I love a good email. I love a bad email.
Yep.
I love, as long as people can bring some, vibes in a constructive way. I think that's the
Sure.
important part, right? Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for hopping on.
Thank
I'll
you.
put links to everything below. Go buy it. Everyone's going to like it. I love it. Give it a
Thank you very
go, and
much.
then dump feedback on Ben or me. Just give it a go. Anyways,
Ben at dinogod.com. Hit me.
perfect. Oh, where did Dino God come from? That's the final question that we're actually going to
Yeah,
ask.
sure. It's because right before I was naming the company, I had a nightmare about a god Tyrannosaurus made of volcano smoke.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So it's just like, oh, let's just call Dino God. And now the publisher at first was like, that's a little crazy, dude. And I was like, we're doing it. That's all. It was a nightmare.
I love it. All right. Well, thanks, Ben, so much. Thanks for everyone for tuning in.
Thank you.
Don't forget, You can find all the links in the show notes if you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on YouTube. If you want to see me and Ben actually having this conversation, check it out, youtube.com/@mergeconflict.fm. Like, subscribe, do all the stuff. Ben, thank you so much. And thanks
Thank
everyone
you.
for tuning in. Catch you later.
Have a good